The night chose its witnesses the way a predator chose which throat to close its teeth around. Welcome to Whispering Narratives. Out here, stories don't begin with once upon a time. They begin with the sound you tried to convince yourself was wind, with the shadow that held still when everything else was moving, with the moment the woods turned their face toward you and waited. Folks in towns like this don't whisper their legends to scare children. They whisper them to stay alive. And, if you're hearing this, the night has decided you're worth whispering to. On the last full moon before winter, the town of Graypine lay under a sky that looked less like weather and more like a held breath. The clouds had thinned to tatters. Strands of dark gauze dragged across a white gold moon, swollen too big, too bright, too interested. Streetlights buzzed, insects went quiet, and the wind that slid between the pines carried something sharp in it, like the smell of a cut that hadn't started bleeding yet. Jonah Hale stepped off the bus with that wind in his lungs and the instant, irrational feeling that the town recognized him. The station was little more than a sagging wooden box with a crooked bench and a vending machine that had long since given up its last soda. The driver didn't wait. As soon as Jonah's boots hit the gravel, the doors hissed shut behind him. The bus pulled away with almost frantic eagerness. Its red tail light swallowed faster than shadows should be able to swallow anything. He stood, alone, under the humming security light, duffel bag at his feet, breath ghosting in front of his face in slow, pale plumes. Somewhere beyond the station, something howled. Not a dog, not a coyote, something too deep, too layered, too deliberate. The sound rolled over the trees and through his ribs, low and rising, like an ancient hinge being forced open. Birds erupted from the dark line of forest beyond the town, beating themselves into pause, beating themselves into the air in panicked bursts that broke apart against the glare of the moon. Jonah went still. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet bark, distant smoke, and underneath it all, a note like hot iron cooling in snow. His fingertips tingled, his jaw ached. For a heartbeat his knees trembled as if every bone in them wanted a different angle. He swallowed once, twice, forcing his muscles to remember human rhythm. Out past the houses, the tree lines seemed to lean closer. Something else moved in that darkness, just at the edge of what the moon would admit. A shape too tall for a man and too still for an animal. Just placed there, like a piece of the night had grown interested and decided to stand. Jonah blinked. It wasn't there anymore. The howl faded into a ragged silence that felt louder than the sound itself. Locals would have crossed themselves, or muttered old phrases then, the kind that tasted like salt and superstition. Jonah just flexed his fingers and tried to ignore the way his nails felt a fraction too thick. The moon watched, the forest listened. Some nights, the legends didn't need to be invited, they came to collect what they were owed. Folks in towns like this don't whisper their legends to scare children, they whisper them to stay alive. Welcome to Whispering Narratives out here. Away from the city's noise and neon, werewolf stories weren't entertainment, they were weather reports, they were evacuation warnings. They were the only reason anyone ever survived the full moon and the night that came with it. Jonah knew that better than anyone, because once, years back, the howl had come from his own throat. He hitched the duffel higher on his shoulder and walked out of the pool of security light, into Graypine proper, and into a town that had never forgiven the last monster it had seen of it, if that monster had once worn his face. The main street was a strip of mismatched buildings huddled close together as if bracing against something bigger than wind. A diner whose neon signs sputtered Pine Eats, a hardware store, a gas station, a church with a steeple that clawed at the moonlight. Most windows were black, curtains drawn tight. Those that still burned with light did so nervously, as though the very glass were reluctant to shine. The farther he walked, the more he felt it. Not eyes, but memory. The echo of a town that had once watched a boy leave with blood on his shirt and promises in his mouth. Jonah had come back to keep a promise. At first, Graypine had blamed the wolves. Then the thing that tore through livestock pens and ripped barn doors inward, like paper, had stood upright in the headlights of a sheriff's truck, eyes burning like twin embers pressed into wet ash. It had moved with a purpose wolves didn't have. Worked door latches wolves couldn't work. And when it finally went down in a volley of silver-jacketed bullets, it had tried to speak. Jonah still heard those half-words in his dreams, forced between teeth that weren't made for language anymore. People remembered monsters. Sometimes they remembered wrong. Sometimes they remembered just enough to be dangerous. He kept to the sidewalks, cracked center, away from the deep seams where shadows pooled. His boots made small, definite sounds, 1, 2, 1, 2 against the concrete. The rhythm comforted him. It also made him easy to track. He knew this because something matched it in the trees across the road. 1, 2, soft, almost inaudible. The suggestion of pads on dry needles, just offbeat enough to remind him that he wasn't alone. Jonah didn't look, not yet. He passed a telephone pole. On it, nailed crooked at eye level, was a wooden sign painted with big block letters and a smear of red that might have been intentional and might not. Curfew, dusk, nitrogen monoxide, exceptions, stay indoors on full moon. Below it, someone had scratched another line with a knife tip. We only get one warning. The wind turned again, coming out of the woods this time, and caught the collar of his jacket like a hand. Underneath pine and damp earth came another smell, one he had forced himself to forget. Fur rank with exertion, hot breath, the metallic tang of blood blooming on air before it ever hit the ground. His shoulders tightened. He knew that scent from the inside. For a second, his vision stuttered. The town lights blurred, just sharpening in strange places instead. The twitch of a curtain, the flick of something pale in the alley, the pulse in a man's throat as he crossed the street far ahead and hurried into a bar whose sign still burned open in defiance of the posted curfew. Jonah blinked hard, and the effect eased. The world dropped back into human focus. He reached the motel at the end of the strip, the last building before the road narrowed and the forest poured closer. Its flickering sign proclaimed Moonlight Lodge. Only the M and the N worked without stuttering, so from a distance it read something more honest. Oh, Light Lodge. He almost laughed. Inside, the lobby smelled of stale coffee and the kind of disinfectant you only used when you didn't want to admit what you were really trying to clean. The woman behind the counter looked up with the exhausted suspicion of someone who had been surprised too many times in too small a place. You picked the wrong night to pass through, she said, even before hello. Jonah dropped his duffel beside the counter. Looks like the busgetter didn't consult the moon. Her gaze dipped to his hands as he pulled out his wallet. People did that around here, checked fingers, nails, reflexes, as if the curse left fingerprints. You from around here? She asked. Used to be, Jonah said carefully. Long time ago. Well, we locked the doors at 9. She slid a register card toward him. If you're not inside by then, you're on your own. Sheriff's orders. A sheriff's car rumbled past outside as if summoned, the redanned blue lights off, the spotlight gliding over houses instead, watching, counting, making sure everyone chose inside over outside tonight. Jonah took the pen. His hand hovered over the line-marked name. The room seemed to lean in, waiting to see what he'd write. He printed, in plain block letters, Jonah Hale. The pen scratched loud in the quiet. The woman's reaction was small but total. Her pupils widened, her shoulders twitched as if bracing for impact. He saw the moment recognition slotted in, the way a puzzle piece makes the rest of the picture unavoidable. She didn't say his name out loud. Not here, not with the moon listening. Instead, she pushed the key across the counter, her fingers not quite touching his. Room 12, second floor, last door before the end, before the edge, he translated. Thanks. He picked up his duffel and turned to go. Double, quotes Mr. Hale, she said. He paused. If you came back thinking you can fix what happened? Her voice dropped, thinning to something like a frayed string. Just remember, we buried what was left. But we never found the head. The wind rattled the front windows, somewhere far too close, in the direction of the tree line. A howl started low and broke, halfway through, into something almost like a laugh. Ask the locals about that night. They'll look away before answering. Jonah went upstairs. The room was small, worn, and clean in the way things get clean when someone scrubs to hide the memory of a stain rather than the stain itself. The curtains had already been drawn. He checked them anyway, easing the edge back with 2 fingers and peering out. The motel lot was a small rectangle of cracked asphalt with a few vehicles scattered across it. A pickup with a tarp over the bed. A sedan with a baby seat strapped in the back. The sheriff's cruiser angled like a wary animal near the exit. Beyond that, nothing but road in the solid black wall of trees. The forest stood like a jury. He let the curtain fall. The mirror above the dresser caught him in its cheat, silvering glass. Mid-30s, dark hair curling slightly at the neck. 3 days' worth of road stubble, eyes ringed in a tiredness that went deeper than travel. Old scars peered pale and raised from his left forearm. The jagged semicircles too wide and uneven to be anything but teeth. He didn't look at that arm often. Tonight the scars looked back. Just one night, he murmured. One moon. That's all. He'd told himself that on the bus, in the city, in the cramped apartment he'd built like a bunker out of cheap locks and careful routines. One night, to make sure the thing Graypine never found a head for was really gone. One night to stand under the same sky and prove that whatever he had been, whatever had once worn his bones like a borrowed suit, was finished. That was the plan. Plans didn't often survive first contact with hunger. He unzipped the duffel and took inventory. Silver chain, check. The links glinted dully, each one etched with tiny, careful symbols from an old book in a language no one spoke out loud anymore. Heavy padlock, check. Sedatives, legal, prescribed, hard won, check. He laid them out on the bed like ritual tools. Outside, the moon climbed higher, shedding any pretense of softness. The sky around it darkened in a ring, like a bruise-forming dot. No one survives the night it chooses. The old stories said that was the trick of curses. They weren't about fairness. They were about selection. He sat on the edge of the bed and waited to see if this night had chosen him. The first sign was always small, a warmth in the bones, deep and itchy, like the memory of a fever. A sense that your joints weren't quite aligned, that some other version of you was trying, gently at first, to take your place from the inside. Jonah felt it coil in his spine around 8:30. He closed his eyes. Breathed in for 4, out for 6. Focused on the human frame of things. The cheap polyester bedspread under his palms. The faint television noise in the room next door. The steady thump of a bass line from someone's car down the street. Murmur of the motel's ancient plumbing. Faintly, underneath all that. Another sound threaded through, distant at first, then growing. Not a howl, dot scratching, like claws against wood. It came from below his feet. He opened his eyes. Floorboards didn't whisper, but old blood did, and Graypine's motel had seen more full moons than it had renovations. The itch in his spine sharpened to a pressor. His teeth ached. His canines felt heavy to present. The room swayed just a little, as if the world's center of gravity had shifted an inch to the left. He needed to act before the second sign. He stripped off his jacket and shirt, hands steady by habit, not by feeling. The scars on his arms seemed to pulse under the motel's weak lamplight. He wrapped the silver chain around his torso, looping it under his ribs and across his chest, cinching it tight. The metal bit into his skin with a cold that felt personal. Not tonight, he told whatever part of him still knew how to listen. You're done. He leaned against the headboard and clicked. The padlock shut through the last 2 links. The pressure climbed his spine like something remembering how to stand in the mirror. His reflection watched him, breath shallow, pupils wide enough to drown the color of his eyes. For a moment, just a moment, he saw movement behind himself in that glass, something tall and furred, hunched in the corner near the closet. He turned. The corner was empty. He turned back. The reflection was not. It had not moved. It had not stepped. It had shifted, as if someone had painted over him with the same person, but in a different phase. Skin waxy, ingratiated veins sleeved in black under the surface. Cheekbones sharper, jaw lengthening, crowds of teeth crowding the mouth, eyes burning that same low ember red he remembered from the shaft-struck headlights years ago. The him in the glass smiled, wide and toothy and wrong. His own lips did not move. The pressure in his spine broke. There are 2 kinds of transformations in the stories. The ones that crash through you like a truck, and the ones that slide over your bones like a new, cold skin. Jonah had lived through the first. Tonight, he discovered the second. Something peeled away from him without leaving. As his muscles clenched and his vision blew out with white static, the chain bit deeper, holding his body on the bed, locking bone to wood. But the presence inside him heavy-flagged, hungry stepped sideways, not out of him, out of the mirror. Glass didn't shatter. It folded, rippling like water under a thrown stone. The reflection stepped forward through it, dragging shadow with it, tall and bending at the wrong points. Claws finding purchase on the threadbare motel carpet like it had known the weave for years. The thing that had once been Jonah Hale when the moon took too much stood in room 12, separate from the man chained to the bed, and shook itself like a dog relieved of a collar. Its fur was a black so deep the motel lamplight seemed to vanish into it. Its chest rose and fell with slow, controlled breaths. The muzzle was long, the teeth too many, each one a pale, perfect blade. But the eyes were human, not all at once, not entirely, but enough. They looked at Jonah with the amused curiosity of someone finding an old photograph and comparing it to the mirror what had been. What was never meant to be separate. Jonah couldn't move. The chain held his torso, but it was his own body that betrayed him. Muscles locked in a half-spasm, halfway between man and something else, as if every tendon was trying to remember which shape it had been promised. The werewolf, his werewolf cocked its head, thought you could drown it, the sheriff had told him once, back when the curse was new and they both still believed in remedies, thought you could cut it out. But things like this don't die. They divide. The monster stepped closer. Each step was silent, almost delicate. It leaned down until the exhale from its nostrils washed hot over Jonah's face, smelling of meat and night and old pine sap. "So you're what's left," Jonah whispered. Voice scraped raw from somewhere, deeper than his throat. The werewolf's lips pulled back from its teeth in something that was not a snarl and not a smile, but contained too much intention to be either. Underneath them, Graypine blazed. Down the hall, someone's child started crying. Thin wails muffled by plaster. A television clicked off. The sheriff's cruiser engine turned over outside, then killed, then turned over again as if it was stalling not from mechanical fault, but from reluctance in the forest. The other wolves not cursed, not twisted. Just wolves went quiet. The moon moved a fraction higher, enough to send a new bar of light slanting through the gap in the curtains, across the werewolf's shoulders. Fur shimmered, every hair lit in silver edges. For a heartbeat, Jonah saw another image overlap it. A silhouette on a hill, claws dug into the earth, head thrown back in a howl that split clouds. A spray of blood hanging in the air like a constellation just before gravity could remember itself. Claw marks raked into a barn door, each groove too deep, too clean. Pieces of nights he'd tried to forget. He'd come back to make sure the monster was gone. Instead, he'd pulled it into the room with him. Locals say the moon never glows. The same after that night, the stories went. Once it's seen what wears your name, it never quite forgets. The werewolf leaned close enough that one long, black claw could touch the chain across Jonah's chest. The metal hissed, tiny sparks spitting like the chain had opinions about being touched by its opposite. The creature didn't yank or scratch. It just traced the links, thoughtful. Something scratched downstairs again, louder this time, insistent. The building's bones protested, timbers creaking the way they did in winter when too much snow pressed on the roof. Only tonight, the weight wasn't snow. The town had not miscounted. It had buried what was left. It just hadn't understood what left meant when you split a curse in two, outside. Another howl started, this one not from the monster in the room. Higher, nearer, desperate, livestock. No, the sound warbled around syllables, around almost words. Only one family lived close enough to the motel for their cries to carry like that. The werewolf's head turned toward the window. Jonah found his voice through the weight in his chest. Don't. The creature looked back at him. Its eyes flared, red shading down to an ember ond, then something like molten gold. Through that color, for a fraction of a second, he saw his own gaze staring out, not pleading, weighing if this reminds you of something you've heard. You're not alone. Graypine's curfew wasn't about keeping people off the streets. It was about keeping witnesses from seeing what the sheriff couldn't stop. The chain vibrated under Jonah's skin. With each heartbeat, he pushed his shoulders against it, every fiber of muscle screaming as he tried to move more than a few inches. The padlock dug into his side. The air felt thick, full of the taste of fur and heat, and the ionized edge of an approaching storm. If you go out there, he said, each word a nail forced through wood, it doesn't end. It never ends. You know that. The werewolf blinked slowly. Behind it, the mirror showed room 12, as it would have looked on a normal night. One bed, one man, one lamp, no monstrous shape, no split self. For a moment, Jonah had the insane instinct to beg it to step back through, to fold into him again, to become internal, manageable. An illness instead of a neighbor. That was the curse's last kindness, offering reunion with the thing that ruined you. Downstairs, glass shattered, a scream cut off midway, like something large had learnt the shape of a throat from the inside. There were two sets of claw marks in Graypine's history, the ones Jonah had made and the ones that had come after, with a different rhythm and a different hunger, as if the curse had decided it preferred having its own body. Tonight, they overlapped. The werewolf turned away from him. It padded toward the door, each footfall leaving no visible mark but dragging the temperature of the room with it. Colder where it had been, hotter where it was headed. Jonah sucked in air through clenched teeth, braced his feet against the end of the bed, and pulled. The world collapsed to simple mechanics: chain, bone, muscle, will. There was no magic to what he did next, no ritual, no ancient word. Just a man with enough guilt in him to make a god flinch, trying to drag his body into motion before what he used to be tore through another life. The chain groaned. The padlock protested. His skin split under the pressure. blood sliding around the links like a last attempt at lubrication from the human side of things. Something in his left shoulder gave with a wet, grinding pop. He moved. Not much, not nearly enough, but enough that when the werewolf reached the door and hooked its claws lazily under the knob, turning it with effortless, obscene familiarity, Jonah managed to throw himself sideways. The bed lurched, the chain shifted, the padlock dug deeper, the door swung open. The hallway beyond was a thin slice of flickering yellow light, cheap wallpaper, and the distant, horrible sound of something big trying to fit through a space built for people. The werewolf paused in the doorway and looked back at him one last time. In its eyes he saw not cruelty, not relish, but something worse, indifference to the distinction between you and me. If you walk out that door, Jonah rasped, it's on both of us. The creature's ears flicked once, irritated by the sound, rather than persuaded by the words. It stepped into the hall. The motel shuddered as the night decided what it wanted. If you're still here, the night hasn't let you go yet. The chain snapped against his chest with each breath. Jonah closed his eyes for 1 second, not to rest, but to choose. The old stories said the curse lived in the blood and the bone and the moonlit spaces between thought and instinct. They said once it took root, you got 2 choices: be worn by it or wear it the way a soldier wears a scar. It had been a lie. There was a third option: split, divide, externalize. But that had only made things worse. He opened his eyes. His reflection in the mirror was normal now. Just a man, half strangled by silver, blood on his chest and fury in his eyes. Downstairs, the screaming stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, heavy, content. He didn't know how much of the night was left. He knew only that the moon had not started its descent. If anything, it seemed to have lodged itself at the top of the sky and refused to move. Soaking Graypine in a light that felt like observation, he pulled himself off the bed, inch by inch, dragging chain and padlock and unwilling, treacherous limbs. Every scrape of the links over his skin felt like fire. His left arm hung at an angle that would require someone else's hands to fix. He made it to the door. The werewolf hadn't bothered to close it. Monsters rarely did. Why secure what you consider yours? The hallway was empty. Shadows pooled thick around the stairwell at the far end. The carpet was dark. In this light, he could not tell where the patterns ended and the stains began. The scratching from below had stopped. He moved toward the stairs, each step a negotiation between gravity and intent. Halfway down, the smell hit him. Blood, yes, but also the sour tang of fear, sweat, the burnt-toast stench of electrical things dying too fast. And under that the unmistakable sweetness of meat cooling in air. He froze on the last step. The lobby was a ruin. The front desk had been split down the fleed middle, wood hanging in wet, jagged splinters. The vending machine lay on its back, glass front punched inward. Candy bars and chips spilled out like organs. The telephone was in pieces. The cord snapped. Behind the counter, the motel woman lay in a crooked heap. Her throat was open in a red smile, eyes wide, mouth stretched around a sound that never finished. Her hands were clenched tight around something she had tried to hold on to until the very end. Jonah stepped closer. The object was small, wood, and stained. One of the curfew signs broken off its pole. She'd tried to hold on to the rule itself. Jonah knelt long enough to close her eyes. It was an empty gesture. Nothing in this night wanted closing. But some routines were stronger than curses. The front windows were gone, reduced to teeth of glass in the frames. Beyond the ragged holes, the parking lot boiled with motion. Shapes, streaked through the moonlight, some on 4 legs, some on 2, some in between. Wolves from the forest, wild and lean. The sheriff, gun drawn, firing into that chaos with the frantic discipline of someone who knew their bullets might not matter, but aimed anyway. And the werewolf, his werewolf dotted, moved through the chaos like a conductor through an orchestra, barely touching, redirecting. When it slashed, it did so with intent. One blow to the truck's tire to stop it. One swipe to the sheriff's arm to disarm but not kill. One brutal, stunning strike to a shielding father's shoulder, sending him sprawling but leaving him breathing. It wasn't hunting at random, it was herding. Jonah watched the pattern merge with the horrible clarity of someone recognizing his own handwriting in a threatening note. The wolves drove the people together toward the center of the lot. The werewolf carved a circle around them, claw marks scoring the asphalt. Each stroke a line in a diagram Jonah didn't want to understand. They were making a shape. Old books had diagrams like that. Circles, symbols, places where blood was meant to fall. Graypine thought it had seen the worst of the curse the night Jonah first turned dot. Now it was learning what happened when the curse got to practice. He could stand in the doorway and watch. He could let the sheriff and the townspeople and the wolves and the thing that shared his history finish whatever this was between them. He could stay in the motel, chained and bleeding and technically innocent. Or he could do the one thing he'd never, ever done. He could claim the curse instead of apologizing to it. He stepped through the broken frame. Moonlight hit him like a thrown stone. His skin prickled, his vision sharpened. Every shadow became a shape, every breath a map of scent. He smelled the sheriff's fear, the motel woman's blood drying behind him, the wolves' wild confusion at being placed in a formation they had not chosen. And underneath it all, he smelled himself, not his own sweat or skin, but the echo of it, fur-upped, iron-edged, the aroma of a predator that had fed alongside him, through him, inside him. The werewolf stopped carving and looked up. The circle was almost complete now. A rough ring of gouged asphalt and scattered debris, enclosing the huddled townspeople. The wolves paced the perimeter uneasily, some with ears flattened, some with tails low, all caught between their nature and whatever gravity the curse exerted. The sheriff turned too, chest heaving, one arm slick with blood from the bite that had ruined his aim. "Get inside, Hale," he shouted, voice raw. "You don't belong out here." Jonah didn't answer. He walked toward the ring. Every step peeled something off him that had never been physical. Hesitation, disbelief, the desperate, childish hope that someone else would fix this. The chain around his torso clinked with each movement, a mocking necklace. The werewolf watched, eyes narrowing. The closer he came, the more the world divided. Human on one side, Lupin on the other, and he in the seam between. The wolf's fur rippled in the cold. The townspeople's breath steamed loud and fast. The circle of claw marks smoked faintly, as if the very concrete resented being used for this. He stopped at the edge. "This isn't you," Jonah said, speaking as much to himself as to the thing across from him. "This is what happens when nobody chooses." The werewolf tilted its head. A wolf near the sheriff snarled, teeth bared, but didn't cross the line. The sheriff's gun hand shook. "Hale, I swear to God, if you remember the first barn?" Jonah asked the monster, ignoring the lawman's panic. "The one with the red door? The night you realized you didn't need me awake to do what you wanted?" Flashes, teeth sinking into hot flank, hot steam of breath in winter air, the red door swinging open on its own, latch undone not by clumsy paws but by deliberate claws. The werewolf's lips twitched, that almost smile again. "It was always going to be this," Jonah said. "A town stuck between running and worship. You alone, out here building your own liturgy out of blood. He stepped over the line. The air changed. Sound dropped away as if someone had cut the night in their hands. The wolves went still, every head snapping toward him. The townspeople's murmurs cut out, throats closing on instinct. The curse recognized one of its own stepping into a circle meant for victims. The werewolf moved in a blur. One moment it was 10 yards away, the next it was close enough that Jonah could count the hairs on its muzzle. It hit him hard enough to send him to his knees. Claws bit into his shoulders, careful and precise, just shy of lethal. It could have torn his chest open. It didn't. Instead, it leaned in until their foreheads almost touched in its eyes. The gold burned brighter, pushing back the red. For 1 sick second, he saw his own face projected in them, not as reflection, but as a possibility. Jonah, as he would have been if he'd stopped fighting the first time and let the curse shape him from the inside out. "Take me," he whispered. The words were not surrender. They were an invitation with teeth. He had spent years trying to starve the curse, outrun it, carve it out. He'd never considered swallowing it on purpose. The werewolf's claws flexed. This was the rib. Third option, the stories never mentioned. Integration. Not a boy mangled by a monster, not a monster masquerading as a man, but something in between that chose its shape instead of being chosen. The moon pulsed. The chain around his chest went searing hot, every etched sigil igniting. The links snapped under a pressure that came from nowhere human, flying away in molten arcs. The sheriff flinched. The wolves howled as one, voices blending into a single, shattering note that rattled the motel windows and shook snow loose from the high branches. The werewolf lunged into him. It didn't to him. It didn't step back through a mirror this time. It dove forward, teeth closing on empty air, body hitting his fur and flesh and shadows streaming together. For a moment the world consisted of nothing but pressure and sound. His bones creaking under a load they had carried before, his organs rearranging around a presence they had once housed, his mind cracking like thin ice under too much weight. Then it was inside, not like before. Before, it had been a rider on his back, a weight behind his eyes. This time, it settled differently. It threaded itself through him, in and out of memories, anchoring in the places he'd never forgiven himself for. The circle on the asphalt stopped smoking. The wolves staggered, as if a string connecting them to something external had been cut. The townspeople sucked in shaky breaths. Jonah stood. He expected to look down and see fur. He saw hands, human, bloody, shaking inside those hands. Under the nails, something else moved, tensile, held shift. His vision sharpened, but did not go red. His hearing caught the skitter of an insect under a vending machine and the sob of a boy clinging to his mother's coat. His sense of smell expanded into a map of fear and hope and iron and pine. But it did not drown him. For the first time since the first night, he felt both man and monster at once. The moon seemed to hesitate. No one survives the night it chooses. The legend said they had never been tested against someone who chose it back. He looked at the wolves go, he said. The command wasn't loud, but it carried. It rode the air on a frequency old as hunger. They went, not in panic, not in a blind rush. They turned, one by one, and trotted toward the tree line, disappearing into the forest's dark mouth with the rest of the wild things that it didn't like. Seeing their half-brother standing upright, the townspeople stared. The sheriff held his gun up, shaking, torn between training and the unmistakable feeling that the target had changed. "Sheriff," Jonah said, voice raw but steady, "you can shoot me. Might even work. But you've seen what happens when this thing doesn't have a host." He almost said owner, but that didn't fit. Nothing like this belonged to anyone. You're asking me to trust a werewolf, the lawman said. I'm asking you to trust that I hate what it's done more than you do. The moon slid a fraction lower, not much, not enough to start the dawn. But the night was no longer perfectly held. Something had been decided. The sheriff lowered his gun an inch. One night, he said, you stay, we watch. If anyone dies, that's on me, Jonah finished. All of it already is. The townspeople didn't cheer. They didn't thank him. They didn't approach. They watched, wide-eyed, as he walked out of the circle and toward the edge of the lot, where the asphalt crumbled into dirt and the forest waited like a question. He paused at the boundary. The curse tugged at him, wanting the trees, the dark, the hunt. The man tugged back, wanting the town, the people, the possibility of a life measured in more than full moons and apologies. He stood exactly between Graypine, would tell this story differently in the years to come. In some versions, he would be a martyr, walking into the woods to keep the monster away. In others, he would be the first of a new kind of thing, a guardian as dangerous as the threats he held at bay. But the truth was simpler and worse. He didn't go into the forest. He didn't go back to the motel. He walked the perimeter of Graypine, all night under a moon that refused to set. He walked with the werewolf inside him, every step a negotiation. When stray wolves approached, he drove them back with a voice they recognized. When hunger rose, hot and metallic and eager, he steered it away from houses and toward the invisible line where the town ended and the wild began. When the curse whispered for blood, he fed it instead on memory. Every scream, every torn door, every family that had buried an empty coffin because something with his teeth had carried the body too far. The night did not let him go. It did not let Graypine go either. It stretched long and strange until time lost its usual markers. The sheriff dozed in his car and woke with a start, unsure if minutes or hours had passed. Children fell asleep in closets, clutching flashlights that had long since run out of batteries. The motel room where the mirror still hung showed only an empty bed. Just before dawn, the moon relented. It slipped behind a bank of low clouds. Glow smudged, edges blurred. The sky around it paled. Jonah stopped walking. He stood at the back of the church, where the grass gave way to scrub and broken stones. The werewolf in him paced, restless, then lay down, then paced again. It didn't leave. It didn't try to tear its way out. It sulked. You're not the only one trapped, he told it, voice no more than a breath. We do this together, or we don't do it at all. The first birds started to sing, tentative. The sound grated on the curse's nerves. It dug phantom claws into his ribs. He let it. Locals say the moon never glows the same after that night. The stories would begin years from now. They say there's a man who walks the dirt roads when it's full, eyes too bright, steps too quiet, making sure the wolves remember where the line is. They'd lower their voices then. They say he's the reason anyone survived the last one. Jonah turned his face toward the thinning dark. He knew now that there would be no cure, no clean ending. There would only be a series of nights like this, each one a test. The curse had been a weight when it was separate, a torment when it was in control. Now it was a partner in a dance neither of them had agreed to, but both of them would perform. Sometimes the worst thing you could do to a monster was not kill it. Sometimes the worst thing you could do was make it share a life. The sun, finally, shouldered its way over the horizon, light spilling over Graypine's houses, the motel's broken windows, the blood-streaked parking lot. People opened curtains with shaking hands. The sheriff stepped out of his car, neck-cracking dot at the back of the churchyard. Jonah Hale stood in the last strip of shadow, the werewolf's presence tucked just under his skin, too coiled to be called tame, too contained to be called free. No one saw him slip away down the road that led out of town. They only noticed, years later, that on every full moon, when the curfew signs creaked in the wind and the sky went that particular bruised color, the howls in the forest never quite crossed the limits of Graypine. Ask the locals about that night. They'll look away before answering. If this reminds you of something you've heard, you're not the only one who's been listening. When the last porch light clicked off, and the town surrendered itself to another cycle of day and habit and denial, the moon, now thin and small and pretend innocent in the brightening sky, hung there like an old scar. It remembered, so did he, and somewhere between the two, the werewolf inside him lifted its head, not in rage, not in triumph, but in a low, quiet acknowledgement that for as long as the curse and the man shared a body, the night would never entirely belong to either of them. If you're still hearing echoes of their howls long after the story's ended, it's because the night marked you too. These kinds of tales don't leave you the way they found you. They settle in the places you glance at in mirrors and try not to recognize. If the roads where you live get too quiet on full moons, if the dogs in your neighborhood go silent all at once, if the sky feels like it's holding its breath and you can't explain why leave a word below, someone else may need the warning before the next moon rises. And if you find yourself listening for footsteps outside your window when the clouds part and the light turns that sharp silver color Graypine knows too well, stay with us. Follow the stories. Subscribe before the next full moon. Some roads you should never walk alone. If you're still listening, the night hasn't finished with you yet. Stories like this don't end when the audio cuts out, they linger in the corners, in the glass, in the way you flinch when a dog howls a little too long at the sky. If any part of this felt familiar, if you've ever heard a howl where there shouldn't be one, seen eyes watching just beyond the tree line, or walked a road that went too quiet under a full moon, leave a mark below. A word, a line, a warning. Someone doom-scrolling in the dark at 3 a.m. might need what you've survived. This is Whispering Narratives. Out here, we don't just tell werewolf stories. We keep record of the nights that almost erase the people who lived through them. If you want to keep walking these back roads with us, through the forests, the forgotten towns, the rooms where the scratching never quite stops, stay close to the pack. The next story is already pacing the fence line, waiting for its turn to sink its teeth in. Don't wander off alone. Subscribe to Whispering Narratives before the next full moon.